Hello.
I'm Ferg.
He's Ferg.
And she's Heather.
Correct.
Lovely. We are new old friends, and the newest new old friend is also with us, so do excuse any unexplained noises. That was Heather. Anyway.
Right, what's going on then, Ferg?
So, Artridge has started his investigation into the missing jewellery. He's spoken to the glamorous Marlena and the vaguely threatening Keiki. But I like Keiki.
I like cake.
You do like cake. Anyway, that leads us on to today's Christmas quiz question. #NOFQuiz.
#NOFQuiz.
#NOFQuiz. Question 4. What nut is marzipan primarily flavoured with?
That's a tough one.
A tough question?
No, tough nut.
You're a fool.
I am. Anyway, on with Chapter 4 of Crimes, Clues, and Christmas.
Ding!
Ding, ding.
That's the Christmas bell.
Crimes, Clues, and Christmas, Chapter 4.
I left Keiki on the other side of the door and stepped from the grandeur and glamour of the theatre into a very different space. Here, in the world of the backstage, the beautiful plaster mouldings, the plush red velvet and the gilt edgings gave way to functionality. The walls were painted black, but the paint was flaking, and large eye hooks were screwed in seemingly at random. Odd bits of tape hung forlornly from the corners and the edges of steps, and a miasma of smoke and dust hung in the half-light. It was far less glamorous, and yet wildly exciting all at the same time. Of course, this wasn't my first time on the other side of the curtain, as it were. People were still talking about my show-stopping schoolboy performance as Juliet, although it was mainly show-stopping because my dress had caught on the corner of the balcony and ripped off, leaving me exposed in the spotlight. The light did not break soft in the east that night, I can tell you. Even with that tragedy of a tragedy in my past, I still felt that tingle of anticipation and exclusiveness by being in an area reserved only for show business people. I've always been fascinated by performers. These miraculous creatures who walk in our world, but somehow not of it. They are simultaneously lauded and revered, but often held at a level little above vagrants. To place your livelihood in the hands of an audience of unknowns seems to me an absurd way of creating a living for oneself. Yet I admire it. And I often wonder if the art investigation game hadn't grabbed me, and if Spotty Gibbons had made sure his carpentry didn't include exposed nailheads ready to rip off a chap's dress, that perhaps I might have entered into the life of a travelling player, roaming the byroads of our country, entertaining the provinces. Clearly I'd lost myself in a reverie, because Marlena was waiting impatiently at the end of the corridor for me.
Come, Mr. Artridge. All day is not what I am having to wait for you. The show will begin soon, and I am not wanting to miss the curtain.
She chided with a curl of her mesmerising lips. Absolutely, of course. But, where are we going exactly?
You do not want to see the safe?
The safe? What safe?
The safe from which the jewels were stolen.
Oh, I see. Yes, please. She led the way to a small office, which branched off the corridor. It was barely bigger than a broom closet, and housed a desk, a chair, a bookshelf filled with folders, and a very large safe with a huge dial in its centre. The tiny office was practically filled with smoke, so much so I almost didn't see the tiny mole-like woman sat in the chair behind the desk. She was wearing a pair of spectacles so thick her eyes had been magnified to the size of apples. The desk in front of her held no fewer than 3 ashtrays, each teeming with still smoking ends. She had 1 cigarette in her mouth, another in her left hand, and was fishing a third from a nicely inlaid wooden box.
Are you the pet dick?
She rasped in a voice that had started somewhere in the southeast, but had been dragged across hot coals for so many years it made my throat hurt just listening to it. Pet dick? I repeated, looking to Marlena for clarification, but the former prima ballerina had a hand to her nose and simply shook her head and stepped outside, closing the door behind her as she did so.
Right. The private detective Rollins said he was sending. Sentimental old fool.
Oh, well, I'm an art investigator primarily, but I suppose that falls under the broad remit of private detective, yes. I was actually involved in a murder case last year. You've probably heard about it. I was hired to go to Liechtenstein. Before I could give her even a flavour of my most famous adventure, she cut me off with a wave of one of her cigarettes.
Sure, I don't care, honey. Eldridge warned me you try and talk people's ears off, And Eldridge's ears look like they're camping for independence from his head. Do you smoke?
She spun her wooden case towards me. Despite my natural disdain for cigarettes as a pipe smoker, I took one out of politeness and lit it from the large golden orb lighter next to it. I do, although I'm clearly an amateur compared to you, I said, gesturing to the 3 cigarettes now protruding at all angles from her mouth. She manoeuvred all 3 between her lips and was now lighting a 4th.
Oh, it's a silly superstition of mine. I try and smoke 1 cigarette per member of the company before curtain up.
I see. Less break a leg, more fill a lung. She smiled a little, sending the glowing tips skyward, forming a little arc of orange light.
If you like.
I'm awfully sorry. I think I'm a bit behind here. I'm Peter Artridge. Who are you, ma'am? She leaned forward and pushed one of her overflowing ashtrays to one side, revealing a small brass nameplate which read, Dorothy Clitheroe.
Dorothy Clitheroe. Everyone calls me Dot on account of my height, or lack of it. I'm the, company manager.
Pleased to meet you, Dorothy. Dot.
Charmed, I'm sure.
So what does a company manager do exactly?
I manage the company. It means I do most of everything. Everything important anyway. I do the bookings, the payroll, the hiring and firing, not the costing. The bar stays stocked, the ice cream stay frozen, and I make sure the rent gets paid and the box office takings make it to the bank. Without me, all the airy-fairy artistic stuff can't happen. You know they call it show business. I'm the business, son. And you better believe I am the bloody business and all.
To punctuate her little speech, she drew deeply on all 4 fags, burning them down to their nubs and stubbing all 4 into the nearest ashtray.
Last one, Daisy Love, our new prima.
She drew a single cigarette from the box and flipped it into her mouth with a snap of her wrist. It was quite impressive.
So, what can I do to help you with your investigation be over and done with, Mr. Artridge?
I'll be honest with you, dear listener. I had hitherto been carried along on the current of the case without really formulating much of a plan of attack. But Peter Artridge is a man who thinks on his feet and is ready to put his best foot forward when things are afoot. I should like to start with an account of exactly what was stolen, when, how, and by who, ideally. Yes, that sounded like a good list. Well done, Artridge. Huh?
Did you just say how and by who?
Rasped Dot. I did.
If I knew who had stolen the jewels, Rawlins wouldn't have had to hire you, would he?
That is a good point, Dot. Very astute. While we're on the subject of Rawlins hiring me, will I be collecting my wages from you, do you think, or...
I'm not minded to pay you a penny on your current performance, Mr. Artridge. Not impressive. Not impressive at all.
That rather dented the Artridge pride. One doesn't want to be accused of not being impressive, particularly one clearly dresses to impress, and all the more so when the insult comes from a woman who looks like Dot Clitheroe. I've already mentioned her glasses and outsized eyes, but her hair was a bird's nest perched on top of her head. Fronds were reaching out in all directions, and I couldn't be sure I hadn't caught a glimpse of a fag end in there somewhere. But I must admit, I'd made a blunder and hardly swept into the theatre on a blaze of glory, blinding all and sundry with my deductive prowess. I decided to start over. OK, Ms. Clitheroe. I assume Ms. from the lack of a ring on your finger, I began, and, thanks to the magnification her glasses provided, saw a gratifying dilation of her pupils as my guess struck home. I'd like to start by you providing me a description of the jewellery in question. You will no doubt have filed a document detailing the items with your insurers as soon as they came into your possession, which will be in one of these files. I gestured languidly at the bookshelf. I was really feeling my oats now. Then, after that, I'd like to inspect the safe in which they were stored. It looks like a Samuel Withers & Co. A good brand, but I'd have stumped for a Rosengrens myself. Another satisfying blow scored. Finally, I'll need a room where I can conduct interviews with anyone who had access to the backstage area on the days in question. I felt very happy with myself. My ego had taken a few blows in the early rounds, but I'd gathered myself in my corner and come out swinging, landing solid shots of my own. It was because I was feeling so good I tried to emulate Dot's impressive cigarette flip, and ended up throwing my lit cigarette into my mouth the wrong way round, burning my tongue quite badly. Another reason why I prefer the solidity and form of the pipe over crass cigarettes. Ah! I burned my tongue! Dot ignored my cry of pain and hopped off her seat, briefly disappearing behind her desk, and toddled over to the bookshelf. She pulled over a small step, stood upon it and retrieved a file which she tossed onto my lap with disdain.
You were right about the insurance file. The safe is a Withers. Rawlins wouldn't stomach a German-made safe, and I agree. But for your information, it is Mrs. Clitheroe. My Jimmy wasn't nothing but a sweep when he proposed and couldn't afford a ring, so I never had one. But I assure you, Mr. Partridge, I am married. Don't get any fresh ideas.
The idea of getting fresh with Dot Clitheroe wouldn't have occurred to me even if we were the sole survivors of some nautical accident stranded upon an island. But as well as being a debonair, handsome, intelligent and modest man, Peter Partridge is a tactful one, and I stayed stum. I turned the conversation to the stolen jewellery instead, opening the file which had been unceremoniously dumped into my lap. So this is what was stolen?
That's them. 2 10-carat diamond earrings set platinum with a matching choker and 3 rings, a ruby, a topaz and an emerald. They were locked away 3 nights ago after the show. But when I came to get them out for the performance the following day, they were gone.
I see. Was there anything else in the safe at the time? I'd obviously asked the right question, naturally, because Dot's eyes grew even wider behind their thick lenses.
Well, that's just it, innit? There were the previous night's takings, about $3,000 in cash just sat there in bags, and they left it. Who goes to all the trouble to break in, crack a safe, and then leave all that cash just sat there?
Who indeed? I mused. Who in the show wears the pieces?
The Premier, of course.
Of course. So only Daisy Love has worn them?
Oh no, Marlena used to love wearing them. But then Michael, the director, went and switched Primas mid-rehearsal, and the role was Daisy's.
Really? Marlena was supposed to be the lead in this production? What caused her to lose the role?
I'm not getting involved in gossip, Mr. Partridge. You'd have to ask her or Michael. And I wouldn't ask her if I was you neither.
This was an interesting little wrinkle in the case. I'd already seen how tempestuous Marlena could be, then Cakey had warned me about her. Could she somehow have orchestrated this theft out of pure spite? It was certainly a line of inquiry worth noting down. As if sensing she was moving towards the centre of my thoughts, the door opened and Marlena's sculpted blonde head appeared.
Mr. Partridge, you must come now. We will miss the show. You can talk to Dot again afterwards, but I will not be missing this performance.
She actually clicked her fingers at me like a dog before disappearing again. Dot didn't even try and hide her amusement, laughing to herself as she said,
Go on then. Run along like a good boy, Mr. Partridge. Heel, heel.
I stood and straightened my jacket and left with as much dignity as I could muster. I'll be back after the show to continue our conversation, Mrs. Clitheroe. Thank you for the information. It has been very helpful. I made a point of taking the 2 steps to the door at a leisurely pace, but once I was safely through, I'll admit, I broke into a little jog to catch up with Marlena, who was using her elongated legs to power her way ahead, back out into the stalls and to our seats.
Sit next to me, Mr. Partridge,
she commanded. As I sat down, she turned her head skyward and nodded, to who I don't know, but they seemingly got her signal as at that moment the house lights dimmed and the show began. Crimes, Clues and Christmas is a New York Friends production, part of the Comedy Whodunnits For Your Ears podcast series. Written and performed by Feargus, Dunlop and Heather Westwell, with sound and music by Fred Riding. New York Friends gratefully acknowledge the support of Arts Council England in making Comedy Whodunnits For Your Ears.